Well, welcome back to the My First Rodeo podcast, the show where we talk to really cool, interesting, and famous people about the various firsts on their paths to success. And today is no exception. John Delaney is on the show, and what a person he is. So many firsts, maybe a record for firsts if you can put him into big categories. So John is currently the president of Flagler College, a beautiful college in St. Augustine, Florida, and a former Flagler hotel back in turn of the century, and just a beautiful property and a really cool college. But that's hardly the first he's had. He started off as an attorney, obviously has remained such, worked as one of the top attorneys in the Fourth Judicial Circuit in Duval County, went on when the state attorney, Ed Austin, moved over to the mayor's office to be the mayor. He moved over there, had a variety of positions, including general counsel, chief of staff, and then ran for mayor himself when Ed Austin did not run for a second term. And he was the first Republican elected in Jacksonville since, I think, the late 1800s. And to put that in context, there were certainly very conservative people in Florida, many more conservative than John was and is, but it just had a history of being Southern Democrats, if you don't know that history in the South. And things started changing about then. And John's really an enigma. He had 2 terms in office. By all accounts, was a very successful mayor, helped to bring the Super Bowl to Jacksonville, and did a lot of forward-thinking things. We don't talk about some of them. He mentions the Better Jacksonville plan, but really an innovative plan to allow the citizens to increase sales tax to do certain infrastructure and maybe amenities, not the right word, but Coliseum, stadium, roads, sewers, heck of a lot of aggregation of preservation land. So really forward thinking, I wouldn't say apolitical, but probably apolitical, but also not the kind of thing that people think about if they're trying to get reelected, because you're asking people to tax themselves and you're asking them to invest in programs that really won't benefit them in time for you to reap the benefits of it at the polls. But to the credit of the people of Jacksonville, to the people that got behind the Better Jacksonville plan, and to John for contemplating it and pushing it forward, despite what it may mean to his political future, it got done, and we've been reaping the benefits ever since. So that's exciting. That's an exciting part of his life. He went on, though, to a very successful career in a variety of positions, but primarily in academia. He went on to be the president of the University of North Florida. Again, a time where there weren't a lot of non-academicians at the helm of state universities and other universities. And he took that position, notwithstanding some pushback from the academics that he was not one of them. And I think he won them over, and really, again, did an awful lot to invest in the infrastructure at the University of North Florida. And, he stayed in his lane. He realized he was not an academic, so he put good, strong academics around him, and then moved on after some time in private practice and government relationship type work to be the college president at Flagler College. So heck of a lot of firsts, really neat person, and really a unicorn in the current political climate, in the current climate of divisiveness. He is a uniter. He always has worked across aisles, across race lines, and to just get things done practically. And the other thing I really admire about him, and we do get into this conversation, is he is in the model of, certainly Abe Lincoln and others who liked to surround themselves with people that disagree with them and that disagree with each other. Does not see conflict in a respectful way as a bad thing. In fact, it's a strong thing. And to have people that disagree with him so that he can ultimately make good choices. So really a throwback, but maybe something that's still valued. I certainly value it. He values it. And hopefully, in listening to this podcast, if you don't come with a predisposition for that type of decision making in leadership, you'll be won over by it. It's really practical, and it is something that has gone in and out of vogue throughout history. And I think you'll hear in this discussion between John and I a hope, and maybe not a confidence, but a hope that it will come back again, and that it will be valued and should be valued by people, notwithstanding the silos that we find ourselves in. So I've always been an admirer of John. We don't agree on everything, and nobody agrees on everything, but he's always given me time when I want to talk about something. He's always been accessible, no matter what position he's been in. He's always been supportive, not just of me from time to time, but a lot of people on a lot of issues. And I just admire the way he approaches things and the way he lives his life. So I hope both for people that know John, this is a new kind of discussion with him. For people that have followed Jacksonville politics and history, I think it'll be interesting. But I think in a much broader way, he's the kind of person that we need more of right now. And I also hope that this, and I hope this with all of the episodes of the My First Rodeo podcast, that this captures a really important person who did good things in Jacksonville, so that it'll be a time capsule for people to remember the time that he served in, remember who he is, and stand on the shoulders of what he did and the way he did it, so that we can continue to make gains in North Florida community, but really more broad than that. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I certainly did. Went down to Flagler College. We sat in his beautiful office in amazing historic building in downtown St. Augustine. And I think we had a good conversation. I hope you enjoy it. This is me talking to college president John Delaney. John, thanks for being on the My First Rodeo podcast.
Oh, delighted to be asked. Good to be with you again.
I appreciate you making time. Gosh, I can't think of anybody who's done as many things as you have, and I'm sure you get more accolades than a humble person like you likes or feels comfortable with. But you've done them all with such excellence, and in so many instances, really in each of them, without a ton of preparation. I guess you've had some great examples. But what in your life has prepared you for taking on so many different things and then obviously taking them to the highest level?
Oh, I don't even know if I can answer that. I think luck plays a lot into it. I debated in high school, and the only elements of law school that I liked actually was courtroom things. And even though I really haven't practiced law, but maybe 12 to 15 years, depending on how you count it, since 1981, it's a factor in management and decisions, legal issues and or themes. And then I was very lucky to start work in the state attorney's office with the then state attorney, Ed Austin, who later became mayor. And he really became like a second father to me. And was real close to my dad before he passed away. And but he's a phenomenal role model. And so probably a lot of style I kind of gathered from him. But I'm very much a synthesizer. I kind of feed on the people around me and the advice and the observations around me. And so the big thing is to encourage people to be open with you and open with ideas.
Yeah. And was that was Ed Austin's way?
Yeah. Ed was actually more of an introvert than I guess I would call myself, but he did like to assemble bright people that he believed were very bright and talented and kind of leave them in a room to bang ideas around. And my summary of that is that I'm a big believer in diversity of thought, that if you get different perspectives around the table, you're more likely to get better options in terms of decision making. And so the more options you have, then the better the odds are that you're going to have a good option that may even be the best option. And so kind of getting the feedback on that. And Ed would ignore the group every now and then. I will do the same thing. He used to tell the story of Abe Lincoln had a vote of his cabinet, and he said, 7 ayes and 1 nays. The nays have it. So he's very willing to overrule and kind of follow his instinct. And that's actually advice he gave me early. He said, I like your instincts and you should follow them. Stick with your instincts. And so that's been pretty good advice.
And I guess to backtrack then, how did you wind up being one of the people whose advice you take? And I know you started in the state attorney's office, but a lot of people start in the state attorney's office and get some great training. You stuck around and became, ostensibly the top person there.
Yeah, in the state attorney's office, the lawyers tend to turn over after 2 to 3 years, even though most former prosecutors would say it was one of the most enjoyable elements of their career. There's just not a lot of money in there. And so what most lawyers really want to do there is to go start in county court, misdemeanor court, and you want to do felonies. You want to do murders and rapes and armed robberies. And I was actually moved up into felony court before I'd even gotten the bar results back, which you were allowed to practice law for a year if you'd done a trial clinic in law school. And had a good run there and really enjoyed it. And then he asked me to go to what's known as special prosecution, which is white collar crime and public corruption. And nobody wanted to go there because it's slow and it's not exciting. And, you only have a handful of cases, but you can spend, a whole year on a couple of cases. And he told me, well, I'll just keep you there a year and then I'll move you back to a division. And at the end of the year, he said, I need you for another year. And then he asked me to take over juvenile court. And juvenile court was always sort of considered a Siberia. It was difficult to do much with, and you shouldn't be able to do much with, kids that commit a crime that you don't send up to be prosecuted as adults. But I reorganized that to really streamline the processes. And during that time, there was kind of more openness about sexual misconduct. And particularly child sexual abuse. And Ed had always been a big believer that every lawyer should be able to handle whatever case walks in the door. I'm started ahead of you, Michael. You and I are kind of there that lawyers pretty much specialize in some niches now.
Sure.
Ed came from an era where, you hung a shingle out and whatever walked in, you did. And I said, I think it's a special kind of a person that we need to handle sexual assault cases. We had people that come back from Vietnam, rough, tough, and they're just not as supportive of the female victims and particularly kids. And so then he asked me to run that. We set that up. And then after that, he promoted me to what's known as the chief assistant job, the number 2 job. And it was just a wonderful 10-year run with him there, and learned a lot, still draw on him. A lot of us that were his senior people have what we call Edisms, little sayings and phrases that he would come up with that kind of captured maybe a possible direction for a decision.
That's neat. I don't know if you know this. I don't certainly count myself as his inner circle, not by a long shot. But when I was a senior at Jacksonville University back in, must have been 88 or 89, had opportunity to intern at the state attorney's office. He was still the state attorney, and get over there at first. And he had a gentleman with the same last name, but with no relationship, Jack Austin,
who was the chief investigator. Yeah.
So Jack was just sort of running the interns. There weren't a lot of us. And so I got, I'll say, stuck or had the opportunity to work in worthless check division.
Yeah.
I don't even know if writing worthless checks is still a crime because nobody writes them. But that was a big deal, as you probably know. And so I was there for like 2-3 weeks, and it was interesting for a minute and then horribly boring. And I realized that I probably wasn't going to get out of there unless I asked. So I just walked into Mr. Austin's office, and he came around in the beginning and said, open door, come see me. And he picked up the phone and he called Brad Stetson over in Special Pros and said, I got a young student from JU and got sent over there. Remember, it was another building down the street. And I never came back because it was so exciting for me. I mean, at least to see. I worked with all the folks who became judges, Howard Motz and Gary Flower and Brad and Rick Beasler, and I became great friends through that. I mean, whoever you see at that moment in your career seems amazing, but I've always held those gentlemen who I know you must have just left working with them in really high regard. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Loved them all. And Brad Stetson, recently retired judge, and Rick Beasler, who became sheriff down in Clay County. He was a Green Cove guy, and did a wonderful job. He became chief investigator later when Jack Austin retired. And Jack was sort of a roving eye for Ed. Ed, as you mentioned, he'd walk around, kind of stick his head in an office, and he always knew what trials were going on. And then Jack was kind of an eyes and ears for him too. And And Jack kind of half adopted me. I think probably I do owe Jack that he sort of said, "Hey, Ed, I think you need to take a look at John. This kid may be the kind of guy you want." But yeah, it's funny hearing you reference all those names because there is it was an exciting vibe, and maybe it's because we were young lawyers. But you're in that courthouse with all the old gray-haired judges and that had been there for decades. And there's a lot different era back then. You didn't really become a judge till you were later in your career for the most part.
Right.
That was probably changing when you were coming along. But yeah, it was exciting times.
How, and if I've missed this chapter in your life as a contemplation, forgive me, but how did you, people must have told you you'd be a great judge, and you must have at least tried that on in your mind at some point.
Not much, actually. A lot of judges find that to be a bit of a lonely life, and you're not a partisan. You're not an advocate. You're kind of a bit in the middle. I mean, I don't know many judges that are leaving the judgeship once they get there,
Not too many.
I think I probably had more of an activist sort of a bent. Although I've long joked the one job I would take that's outside of Jackson will be the United States Supreme Court, but I have not apparently been on any president's short list for that job. Yeah,
there's a apparent path to that. I don't know if, and it's actually, you didn't mean it as a segue, but I think one of the things, and I've told you this before, and I tell other people that when the subject of politics comes up, and I can count on one hand and probably just a couple fingers, people who went into politics and other things that you've done since then are certainly political, maybe not in an elected official sense, with a good reputation and left with as good or better reputation. And not just amongst, nowadays you get people who build their reputation and grow it with their base, but broad-based, and probably people that maybe didn't even vote for you the first time. What do you attribute that to in the way you approach things? And is it even possible for someone to do that again?
Yeah, the former New York Mayor LaGuardia, that the airport's named after, used to say there's no Democratic or Republican way to pick up garbage. So it's not necessarily a partisan job. But I ran as a Republican. I'd actually been a registered independent from age 18 on, but I voted Republican. And I was kind of waiting to see which wing of the parties, which crazy wing was going to take over. And I ended up falling in love with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s and George H.W. Bush. But when I got elected, about a quarter of Jacksonville at the time's African-American, and I had very few African-American votes. There were precincts that had 0 votes for me. And that was an eye-opener to me. And I woke up the next day after being elected, and it was a brutal, brutal campaign, as they can be.
That was Hazouri and Godbold?
Yeah, it was Tommy Hazouri, former mayor. And
Democrat.
He was a Democrat. He actually ended up endorsing me. He and Jake had a bitter falling out while Tommy was mayor. Jake was mayor from 1979 to 87, and then Tommy from 1987 to 91. Ed then from 91 to 95, and had decided not to run again. And I said, I can't represent this town if a quarter of the town doesn't think I represent them. And so I spent that next year, and it was almost a bit of a spiritual journey. Every other Sunday, I was in an African-American church, and more than my own church. And my number 3 person, Eric Green, who now runs the port, went with me every single time. A lot of politicians will go to the churches and they'll hit 3 or 4 on a Sunday. And I said, no, I'm staying from start to beginning, and began building relationships, hearing perspectives I had not heard before, seeing parts of town I had not been to before. And so I made a big commitment to try to make City Hall more open and involved to the African-American community. I'll hit a fast forward button. When I left office, I left with approval ratings above 80% for blacks and whites, Republicans, Democrats, West Side, Beach, Mandarin, North Side. And a lot is, to, again, borrow a phrase from Ed Austin, that politics is luck and timing. The Jaguars had started when I got elected. The Jaguars had won.
Right.
The 90s had a good economy. The 2000 recession did not have a major impact on Jacksonville. We passed the Better Jacksonville Plan in 2000, which was a big referendum that in turn pumped a lot of money into the local economy and was improving, the roads, the bridges, build a baseball park, library, et cetera. And so it was a bit of an era of good feeling was going on. But my theory in politics was peace is better than war and friends are better than enemies. And if you can find a common ground with people and not compromise a core principle, you got to be pragmatic at times, bend and adapt in horse trade, and enjoyed the time in City Hall. That was kind of career two. Career one was in the state attorney's office in the courthouse. Career two was in City Hall, 4 years as general counsel and then chief of staff to Ed Austin, and then 8 as mayor.
Yeah, and you do seem, again, mostly outside looking in, but I've been around you closer than some and not as close as others. You seem to enjoy what you do. I'm sure not every minute. I know there's difficulties, certainly in all the leadership positions you've had, but it does seem like you have two rare qualities in the types of positions you've had, and certainly pretty foreign nowadays, and that is you enjoy learning. And you're legitimately curious. I think that you're visiting the churches was not, it seems to me, to win people over, although certainly that'd be nice, but to really learn from them so you could be better at your job. And you do enjoy it. Again, not every minute, but you don't approach it with this, this shell of angst or anger that we see so many people in leadership positions possessing.
Well, I know that's a compliment, but the gist of what you're saying, I find really insightful for you to be able to make that. I do enjoy learning. I do enjoy people. I was just reading something from C.S. Lewis, a quote I hadn't seen before, that he says, "No one has met a mere mortal. Everybody you meet is special and unique." And I do enjoy people, and I try to learn from them and learn from those experiences. It's a wonderful world out there. And politics, I also learned it's an opinion. You can take some of the hot button litmus test issues, Roe versus Wade and abortion or the death penalty, whatever your view on those are opinions. And I'll be candid, I've been on both sides of those particular issues, 180 degrees. And so the understanding other people are entitled to their own opinion, I think is really important in politics. When people that are running for office or win come and visit, I always say yes to meet with anybody, no matter what party or what race. And they asked for what advice would I give them. And I said, make sure you understand the consequence of your vote. That at the end, almost every vote touches a human being, whether it's money at the end of a pipeline or whatever, and make sure you understand it. And I think one of my frustrations in politics today, so many people are getting elected. They're very certain. They know exactly what ought to happen. They know exactly what the policy ought to be. And that I learned a lot as mayor. I grew a lot as mayor. And I learned a lot about race and race relations during that tenure and that I didn't know before. And that's a healthy thing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and were you ever concerned, because it seems like politicians and leaders in general, people in general nowadays, are so concerned about conceding that they were wrong about something or that they've evolved on it? That's punished, or at least the perception is that that's punished. And, punishment in politics means you don't get to keep your job. Generally, you don't get the donations, which allow you to keep the jobs. Was that ever in your mindset? It doesn't seem like it is. I mean, obviously, I'm asking you because I didn't see that.
I'm kind of amazed what you've picked up on with your many kids as you've got in your career and the various different things that you do with your life that I've always been fascinated with.
Thanks.
I just lost the train of thought where I was going to go to it. Kick it back up again.
Yeah, sure. Just talking about conceding wrongdoing or evolving on a thought.
It. The best piece of political advice I ever received was from Dave Roman, who was a political columnist for the Times-Union in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, in 90s, I guess. And he said, I don't know why politicians don't just say, I screwed that up. I made a mistake. I misread that one. And And he said, I think they would find that the American public is more forgiving than they think. And I had a few of those where I just said, oops, I blew it. I misread this. I should have taken some other things into account that I didn't. You are right. I believe the climate today is a bit less tolerant for that.
Yeah.
The University of Florida proposed a president that had been the president of the University of Michigan, who had, in his words and my words, evolved on the DEI issue. And he ended up with both sides mad at him,
Right.
kind of the liberal viewpoint mad that he was abandoning it and the conservatives not believing that he was sincere in it. And I'm hoping that doesn't take hold. I think the public can kind of read, is this sincere or not? Or is this just wetting a finger and sticking it up in the air to see which way the wind's blowing? Are they just following that trend? I think they can feel if somebody's sincere about a change in an evolution. So we'll see. It's an interesting time right now for sure.
Yeah. I mean, if you were, if you were a young John Delaney, hard to say, but would you be inspired to enter politics given the current climate? Do you think someone, and obviously I would call you a moderate by today's standards, if that word even exists any longer. Yeah. So kind of a two-part question. Would you be inspired to enter and try to change and be a positive influence? And do you think someone like you could get elected?
I would. I think most people that are in it find it one of the more fulfilling parts of their lives. And, Ed Austin was the very first public defender in Northeast Florida after the Gideon v. Wainwright decision in the early 60s. He was about a 20-year state attorney. He was mayor for one term. He had private practice, just a phenomenal career. He would talk about his 4 years as mayor as the big one. I think most mayors really feel like, okay, hey, did some big things during that window, even those that maybe were defeated after one term, which a lot of mayors were in Jacksonville. Yeah, I don't think people should sour on that. I did go through a period, and this is not a criticism of Rudy Giuliani, but when Rudy Giuliani was mayor, he had that combative bite heads off sort of an approach as a mayor. And I asked myself,
thank goodness he's evolved on that.
Yeah. He's done a couple evolutions, but I kind of go, is that what it takes today to be that? But often I'll get asked to, maybe talk about leadership. And I almost always start with this: take a look at the different personalities, styles, types, and policies of American presidents. They're dramatically different.
Yeah.
And all of them did some big things. That's not to say some didn't do more or better or didn't do bad. But, Ronald Reagan kind of was a 35-hour-a-week guy, considered an icon on the right. Bill Clinton was a 100-hour-a-week guy, kind of an icon on the left. Obama sort of intellectualized a lot of things. Jimmy Carter was hands-on into every single detail, even who gets to play on the White House. There's no one style. And so, people come and bring that whole package. Again, I think if you go in open-minded and listen, you're going to do a lot better when you're in that office than if you don't. I think also if you go in not saying, and I could have, I barely won in 1995 as mayor, 51% of the population and of the electorate. You're going to have a block of people are going to hate you no matter what. You're not going to get them all. You're just never going to get them all. And I just sort of accepted, okay, I'm just not going to fight them. I'm not going to argue with them. I'm not going to get in the mud with them if I don't have to. Every now and then you got to swing a punch back, but by and large, I think being a statesman over time is, trying to play that role is going to make you more effective.
Right. No, I think so. And I hope so. And I don't know why lately I've been captivated by presidential documentaries, both reading them and watching them on TV. And, we could talk forever about the current political climate and who knows where it's going to go. But this particular period did not invent vilification of the enemy and just brutal, whatever you want to call it, name calling and worse. That's they use different words and it was a little loftier at times, but my goodness, it's, it's been an evolution and it goes through cycles, doesn't it?
It really does. And, the early days of the Republic, Thomas Jefferson just vilified. And we've now got a fairly partisan press. Well, that's what it was in the 1800s.
Right.
I mean, it was only really newspapers, but they took a side, and Andrew Jackson was considered an absolute buffoon.
Right.
Abe Lincoln was considered a stupid, uncouth guerrilla. Teddy Roosevelt, they literally wrote articles on, is he crazy? I mean, does he have a mental illness? And really, it's only the benefit of time that you look back and go, okay, now wait a minute. Let's get some perspectives. Woodrow Wilson, who was the advocate for the League of Nations, which later was became the United Nations. He couldn't get the League of Nations approved after World War I. Well, he was a horrible racist and an anti-Semite, which was kind of not the view at the time. He was this progressive, liberal, deep-thinking former college president. And I often say, Michael, that all of us have a bit of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The good Dr. Jekyll, the bad Mr. Hyde. It's a question of where it shows up and how bad it is and how deep it is. And of course, American presidents are that way too. But you're right. The climate has long been brutal. Willie Dennis, former state representative and head of the NAACP in Florida, wonderful woman. She's passed away since. She had a phrase. She did it at Martin Luther King Day breakfast, and she commented on the terrible price of leadership. And unless you've kind of been in that arena, it's hard to understand that there's a price. When you walk out and you give a talk or you sign a bill or you vote for something, and there's haters that just hate you, hate the way you look, hate the way you talk. There's a price to that for people. And so I admire people that are willing to run for office and try to do the job, because they do pay a price.
Yeah. What if you I'm sure you've thought about it. I think the price some people pay is they sort of give some of their soul in combating certain things or everything. That seems to be the current political climate, just to respond to everything and respond by attacking the person or the other side. You don't do that. You've never done that. You've not been known for that. What price did you pay?
Well, I'll go back to your framing. I think Democrats today are doing to Trump what Republicans did to Bill Clinton, to your point. Everything Clinton did, Republicans were critical of. I mean,
Sure.
The color of his suit, the blowing a saxophone on late night TV, wearing sunglasses. I mean, everything the guy did, it was a derangement kind of a syndrome, which has now been applied to the people that hate Donald Trump. And I've got friends left and right. I'm saying, y'all need to pick your spots, pick one that's just real, because now everything's just noise. It's just absolute noise, and half the country tunes it out. And that's, I think, the thing that's probably the most disturbing. My Don Quixote white whale goal is to try to see if we get people to understand the other side's view. Doesn't mean you change your view, but understand what makes them tick, why it's important to them. And there's, to me, it's some great examples. I often say an election is about what you can overlook in one candidate and what you can't in another. Obviously, the Trump and Kamala Harris, Joe Biden voters each had things they were going to overlook in their prospective candidate. My favorite anecdotes on that is I've got a very good friend that is part of a group that we go to the mountains every year to go whitewater rafting twice a year. And he's first generation Palestinian, and he has a distinct perspective on the Middle East. He's not anti-Jewish or anti-Israel, but he's very much a Palestinian supporter. And he hated Donald Trump's Israel Middle East policy, just despised it. And he could go through history and all these reasons on what's wrong with it. He's also very wealthy. And I said, well, who did you vote for? He says, Trump. I go, why? Tax policy.
Right,
so he was able to overlook, one of the strongest beliefs in his ethnic background, because the tax approach really outweighed it. And I think many voters that their vote turned on abortion, that's maybe the single issue that they decide which candidate they're going to go on, for or against Roe v. Wade. But
yeah,
I would say in the United States, in the end, we always get it right. We're still in process on some things, but in the end, we always get it right. And that was sort of Churchill's line. In the end, America gets it right after they've tried everything else before. We'll get there.
Yeah, I think I appreciate your optimism because you have been there. And I hope we do. I think we will. To build on what you were saying about, being a one issue or a 5-issue voter for this person or that person, and I think at the end of the day, you do have to pick one or two candidates at the presidential post-primary stage. But it's the notion that your candidate can do no wrong.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know that it's unique to this time, but it's noteworthy.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And sometimes I think it is just, I'm just going to ignore it. Or then it becomes the compare and contrast, which I think it's a Socratic method. Well, what about your side did this? What about the hypocrisy on your side? And it all comes down. I'm trying to get myself in a more neutral place on this to not get dragged into the debate by those that are extreme. I mean, let's face it, over half the country voted for Donald Trump.
Sure.
Nearly half the country voted for Kamala Harris, and they just don't understand each other. They just can't comprehend that the other side did what they did.
Yeah. And don't want to. I think that's, again, feels different to me. I'm reading a book now. You probably know Arthur Brooks.
Oh, yeah.
And this one's Love Your Enemy. And I was just reading a chapter last night that's about how it's okay to be angry. I mean, I'm sure you had some angry conversations with your cabinet when you were the mayor, and then you'd make a decision or build a consensus or whatever your approach was in the moment. But what we have now is contempt, he was saying. And he was going through statistics in marriage, how marriages where there's anger and fighting do not have a higher than usual, actually maybe even a lower than usual divorce rate, says the guy who has 2 divorces. But when there's contempt, when there's eye rolling or sort of cutting sarcasm where you're tearing each other down, as we're doing in the political climate nowadays, that's when you have a real loss.
Yeah, no question. I mean, one of my rules of politics is don't give the other side ammunition. And each side today is not afraid to give the other side ammunition, a reason to shoot at them and a reason to be outraged. And there's not this sense of civility. And not that long ago, you could watch in the U.S. Senate, even though they disagreed strongly on some partisan issues, they talk in grandiose, eloquent kind of terms, and the right senator, and even though they disagreed with the sort of where they were going, and democracy is not pretty, but in the end, it's the method we've chosen to run ourselves. And over the centuries, that Constitution has sure served this country well, with as many flaws as the original document had. It's worked pretty doggone well.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's definitely definitely an interesting time in the nature of the dialogue and just in the amount of information or misinformation that's out there and how quickly it moves.
Yeah, I'm a inveterate newspaper reader. I get the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the Florida Times.
Physical copy.
No, I don't anymore. I get the Wall Street Journal physical, but I finally have moved online.
Okay.
It's just quicker to read and it's lighter when I travel.
Sure.
Because I usually get a couple foot stack of newspapers I used to do. But there's some stories I didn't even think they're covering the same press conference, and I just saw that video and what they described is not what my own eyes just saw or what my own ears just heard. And I don't see much TV news because I'm not home most nights to be able to watch it, but in print, you could certainly see it play out. And to me, there's a loss of that for, the Wall Street Journal is a more business oriented paper. And so accept that editorial page. The New York Times, the Washington Post, I think ought to be presenting more sides or different perspectives.
Right.
But I'm not sure the readers want it. I mean, CNN tried to move to neutral from sort of a left perspective and their viewership just tanked. And so
I think that's right.
Right now it's sort of the media has decided we got to pick a side, and that's unfortunate.
I think so. I mean, obviously you probably do what I do, or maybe you've seen at least these, there's all sides media where you can basically get a left to right and a center version of the same story.
Yeah.
And, or just do it on your own by reading 3 different publications and sort of saying, oh, this is probably what's happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, not to get down this rabbit hole too far. But what I find most frustrating, forgetting, I believe in the power of the press. I believe in the rule of law. And so, sort of tabling fake news, it's hard to get real information, about things that you may not like. One might not like the way things are happening with the current leader, for example. But they are happening, right? Like things are actually happening. They could be horrible things. They could be good things. They could be, mediocre things, tariffs, whatever. It's hard to did tariffs work or not work? I don't know, because all I know is that one side, according to the news, is stupid and corrupt, and the other side, is just as dumb on the other side. Well, that's not an answer. I mean, tariffs were put in place in the first administration of Trump. Some of them were left in place by Biden, and there's more now. I know that, but I'm not an economist.
Yeah.
I'd really like to know about tariffs.
Yeah. Trump threw the media into a tizzy, and I think they're still sorting through.
Mm-hmm.
And they went through a period where they felt they needed to fact check everything he said, and there's no question he's loose with facts and anecdotes and approximations, as were a number of previous presidents, including Ronald Reagan. And but he still is the president, and you need to report on what he says and does, even if you think he's exaggerating, fibbing, or whatever. But there clearly is enough to debate on what tariffs are going to do to the economy. The Federal Reserve today did not lower interest rates because they're worried about the impact of tariffs on inflation. But I think the criticisms on the left of him on that is that they think it's more knee-jerk than thoughtful. But I saw a clip of him dating an interview back in the 1980s where he complained about unfair trade back then.
Right.
That these countries, and at the time, Japan was the one that really was taking advantage of the rest of the world. They wouldn't let any American or other products into Japan while they were in a massive export. And eventually, of course, it caught up with them, and their economy has been sort of frozen. But it's not as if he didn't tell us he was thinking the countries were ripping us off in terms of tariffs, and whether we needed 155% to get the attention. My understanding is that's his art of the deal. That's the way he negotiates, is to go to the extreme to show leverage. It was one of my first lessons as a lawyer, and you're a litigator. What leverage do we have?
Right.
I mean, how's our proof? How's the law? What leverage do we have to kind of force a resolution into a matter? And that's what Trump wants to do, is show leverage.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just interested in the impacts of things, right? Like, I mean, COVID was a bad thing, but it had an impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be able to study, because I wonder, and you're college president now, and I'm sure you've thought about what happens if that happens again. I feel like in some ways, because of how partisan that issue became and the reaction to it became, are we less prepared for the next pandemic?
Yeah, I'd like to think that public health and colleges and universities are going to be able to step back from the partisanship on that. I picked a lot of juries in my day, and what you're doing is you're trying to find what are the odds this person is going to be more inclined to convict or more inclined to give a business verdict. And so you weigh it out. Policemen probably are going to support policemen, and you could pretty much predict the party by whether somebody's wearing a mask or not by 2021. It became down to that. The source of COVID, was it a lab leak or from the wet markets in that nearby town? It just became a sort of a partisan thing. And actually, if you questioned it, you were shut down as a scientist. And now there's kind of, let's go back, we saw with schools, you learned pretty early with COVID that most kids, it was like a 2-hour fever and they're fine the next day. People my age that have asthma, that's where the risks were, and so clearly now people are saying it wasn't good to shut down schools as long as we did, that there's been such a massive learning loss, but you couldn't have a cerebral thought about that or discussion. You were either you're either one side or the other.
Right.
And that's a loss to the country. There's no question of that.
Yeah, on something like science that didn't historically wasn't that way. So we talked
Although
about.
I think what didn't get accepted, science does change. I mean,
Right.
you
That's
know,
fair.
and I can remember Fauci saying this, that, you know, here's what we're doing. If
Right.
we learn something else, and we're going to go ahead and change it. And unfortunately, he changed too many too quick.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Excuse
Well,
me.
thank you for the object lesson in your asthma. I know you said you had just come back from Europe, and many of you came back a little bit sick. So thanks for pushing through.
Yeah.
So we mentioned that Austin, but you mentioned in passing your father and your mother. You know, so how did they influence who you became? I'm interested to hear you say that you were independent. Again, not that political label matters all that much, but more importantly, you were still finding maybe what politics were and what your politics were into the 80s. Again, it seems like we all picked teams and put a jersey on. We're early now. What about your upbringing allowed you that, you know, freedom?
I had a very blessed and lucky childhood with parents that were happily married and were just great parents. And the older I get, I realize that that's not as common as, you know, maybe we'd hope to have it. But I was in college in the 1970s. I joke that the 60s, what we call the 1960s, didn't really begin till 1965 or 66, and didn't really end until 1976 when Jimmy Carter got elected. That's kind of the hippie era and the rock music era. Prior to that, the Beatles were, you know, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. They didn't get, quote, psychedelic until the late 60s and 70s. And it was early post-Vietnam. It was post-Nixon, you know, where there was just a outrage against Republicans and Richard Nixon. So at the time, I just wasn't in that deep into politics. I just sort of said, I'm going to be an independent, but I pretty much voted Republican, and I did vote Republican, and with some rare exceptions on that. But as you said, I'm largely moderate. I didn't vote for either major party candidate in the last three presidential elections, although I wrote in Republican names. I wrote in Paul Ryan and Jeb Bush. And it's funny, my Trump voting friends said, yeah, Trump's hard to take. We get it.
Mm-hmm.
My left voting friends were just on me that I needed to vote for the Democratic candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And some pretty ugly, actually. And I said, well, I'm a takeaway because I'm a reliable Republican voter. I'm just not adding to the one side. That's not where my values and the principles are. And although, again, on many of Trump's policies, I tend to agree with. I think it's the style that I think turns so many people off, particularly on the left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, along the way, you said Reagan sort of influenced you to at least declare. And then I guess a lot of people won't appreciate. I was reminded, I guess I knew it, but was reminded that you were the first Republican mayor in Jacksonville since the late 1800s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
so help people understand, people outside the Jacksonville market and those who are younger, why that was so. So you were working for Ed Austin, who obviously was a Democrat. What was sort of different about the party in Jacksonville then?
Yeah, well, I think younger people may not appreciate how monolithic the Democratic Party was in the South. And African Americans were Democrats after Franklin Roosevelt. Virtually every Southern was a Democrat, largely left over from the Civil War. And then Roosevelt sort of consolidated the South as well. So Jacksonville had Democratic elected officials exclusively from the 1880s, post Reconstruction until I ran in 1995. When we moved to Jacksonville in 1972, my parents went to register, and basically the supervisor of elections said, it makes no sense to register as a Republican because there's nothing for you to vote for. There's no primaries. Basically, whoever comes out of the Democratic primary is going to be the winner. It was that monolithic. And Ed had been a Southern Democrat. He grew up in rural Virginia, but there was a conservative wing of the Southern Party. So in 1994, the Gingrich Revolution sort of hit, where finally the House, after most of the last previous 70 years had been Democratic, sort of broke through. And I got recruited by 4 local business people in town, 2 of whom have passed away. to run, and as a Republican in 1995 when Ed decided not to run. So, yeah, that was the first Republican elected since like 1888. Yeah.
And was that happening in other cities like Jacksonville across the South, or was yours aberrational?
That was towards the beginning. There was starting to be the switch that came. Reagan was making the turn. He was getting votes, but they weren't driving out House members or senators particularly. And then in the ensuing 20 years, virtually every senator and governor in the South, with the off thing, really had been Republican. Mm-hmm. Republicans sort of consolidated that. Saying that, Jacksonville's real close. And the African-American population, which is 90+% Democrat, is over 30%, I think, of the county now. There's actually fewer whites in Duval County. They tended to move to St. Johns County, Clay, and Nassau. Even if they still work in Duval County. I think Obama won the county. Mm-hmm. I think we've had a Democrat governor or two that has won Duval County. So it's a purple county. It's a question of which way that can tilt. Mm-hmm. The last, we had a Democratic mayor from 2011 to 15, and then currently a Democratic mayor.
Right.
So we can go. Yeah, first woman. That's correct. First African-American in Alvin Brown.
Yeah.
First woman. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so speaking of firsts, obviously you're the first Republican since the late 1800s. At the same time, the first African-American sheriff, also a hugely important position in Jacksonville. Nat Glover, a good friend, a mentor of mine, and really probably one of your best friends, but not necessarily before that election. So he's elected first Black sheriff in the South since Reconstruction, certainly the first in Jacksonville. And you forge just an incredible bond, not just personally, but in terms of your initiatives and the way you went about just really representing everyone in Jacksonville and him doing the same. Talk about, again, what in your backstory gave you the confidence and insight to do that, and how you navigated that.
Nat Glover is one of the best human beings I've ever met. And he was the number 3 person in the sheriff's office. I was the number 2 in the state attorney's office. You obviously interact because the police make the arrests. Sure. State attorney does the prosecution. So I knew Nat. We were friendly. I wouldn't say friends. His story is pretty remarkable. I know he's very fond of you and work you did with Edward Waters College, even prior to him becoming president there. The Republicans had a horse for sheriff, and the Democrats had a horse for sheriff. And each party had backed those 2 candidates. And Nat Glover got in as a Democrat. In Duval County, all of the candidates run in one race known as a jungle primary. And the top 2 go to a runoff. Nat Glover had a fraction of the money of the other 2. He beat both of them without a runoff. I mean, it is absolutely incredible. Mm-hmm. I can remember, I know another friend of yours and one of my best friends, Rick Delaney, commented about a month out. He saw a Nat Glover commercial. And he said, my mother-in-law, who's as conservative as can be, said, I'm voting for that man. He said, Glover's going to win. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So as he joked for many years, I had to run another month because he'd already been elected. And we just clicked. We just flat clicked. And yes, he's one of my dearest friends. I can tear up talking about the guy. I think we both, have helped each other, but that was a major blessing to have Nat there, African-American Democrat. And we never did a single initiative in 8 years without talking to the other one. We also could get caught blind. Hey, did you hear Nat did this? Or, Nat would I didn't get a chance to brief him. Hey, the mayor's doing this. Blind support. Don't even need to get a background on it, And so it was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful 8 years. And, crime dropped dramatically. There was a lot of improvements across the board in the city. We snagged the Super Bowl. He's to this day a dear friend. We get breakfast every couple of weeks, and it frankly is kind of one of my favorite couple hours because we'll laugh and tease and trash talk, but just some deep stuff that you just don't normally. As many good friends as I've got, some of the things you just don't get into, and then after I'd been at UNF a few years, actually, as my dad was talking to me. And I wanted to get more of a black face on the University of North Florida. And Nat had retired. As you know, he'd ran for mayor and was defeated by John Payton. And so brought him in to kind of be an ambassador to higher ed. And he worked, I think, about 3 years or so with us. Originally, he was going to be part-time and then went up. He was part of our cabinet. He sat with the VPs. And it was just like having a business consultant in the office. You know, we'd have a meeting and then he'd come in and he says, you know, what did you think of this? And I'm kind of making these observations about this person. And they were just fascinating. Going to tell one more story on that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So one Saturday, he was at UNF. He called up. And my wife's out of town. He says, can we meet? I've got something important to talk with you about. I said, yeah. I said, actually, Gina's out of town. And we met at UNF. And I'd left my phone in the car accidentally, which I don't normally do. And we go in, and the president of Edward Waters had decided to retire and or go to a different job, was leaving. And the bishop, who was chair of the board, as you know, had asked Nat to talk to me about approaching somebody else to be the interim president there. And that I knew. And I said, well, yeah, I'm happy to do that. I said, but I think I know somebody better. He goes, who? I said, you. And he rocked back. And I said, you've got credibility. You can raise money. People have confidence in your management skills. They've got confidence in your financial skills. You're a graduate of the place. You're well-connected. You're high profile. I think you'd be perfect to do that job. And as his eyes got all big and he takes a big, huge finger of his, he says, don't you say that to anybody else. And when I got down to the car, Ava Parker, who'd been general counsel for the AME church, had been calling me 6, 7, 8 times. John, talk to me before you talk to Nat. John, talk to me before you talk to Nat. And the bishop had already gotten to that point. And so he went over there as interim, and our staff who loved Nat, our general counsel did work over there. Our CFO did work over there. Our risk manager did work over there. Our auditor helped over there. Just completely voluntary, anything that Nat needed. And I got to know his senior team too, that he really assembled a really impressive group of people. And as you know, Mike, the most Edward Waters presidents, unfortunately, don't leave on great terms. You know, it's just, in fact, a major percentage of college presidents don't. You know, it's
Fair
either
enough. It's like a coach of football, right? You
That's
don't
right.
usually end on a high note.
That's exactly right. That's a really good analogy. And but Nat went on a high and did a wonderful job picking that place up.
He did. And that's I did not know that particular story. I know that, like you, he's very humble in all the best ways, confident, but humble. And I can't imagine, until you said that, I bet you he never pictured himself in that position.
No, he really didn't. And he joked, he said, I wished I'd paid more attention at your meetings at UNF during those years. But now I know he is a humble guy. There's no question of that. But I will say he's a world-class trash talker. He can really go. He's like Michael Jordan when he wants to be.
Yeah, he invites it back too.
He does. He enjoys it. Yeah.
I've obviously you and he are a little closer in age. He's older still than you, and certainly older than me. So first he was sheriff, and I was nobody, and then he was the president, and I was doing some legal work there. He's still someone I look up to, but now he's Nat, and I can trash talk a little bit.
Yeah. No, he's very funny. You did some, as you know, I read the work you did for Edward Waters, some of the legal work, and it was incredible. Very, very well done.
Well, I appreciate that. You were a wonderful resource. If you remember this, for listeners, we were fighting for the accreditation of Edward Waters, which had been terminated. We kept it alive through a stay in the court system. But you and the other presidents of universities and colleges locally and beyond, including Janetta Cole and Mayor had people, Mayor Payton at the time, that sort of mooted our arguments and provided some wonderful feedback that allowed us to save the day. And it was just it was one of the best things about Jacksonville. Certainly the most exciting thing of my legal career, but that everybody saw the relevancy and need for Edward Waters, and John Payton came up and testified in the hearing in Atlanta. And he said, if there wasn't an Edward Waters, it was a college then, we would have to create one.
Yeah.
And that was nice to see.
Well, it was a paperwork screw up, and Sachs just way overreacted to it. And I still remember the pleadings or brief that you sent in, how just cogently and clearly you made the argument. And I didn't think it could have been made any clearer. When I still remember reading that. That's maybe 15 years ago. But yeah, well done.
Oh, well, thank you for your support in that process. And since then, you're one of those people that does a lot of things publicly, but you do a lot of things privately. We have a mutual friend who went through some difficult times, and you and I, supported him. And I know those are just anecdotes and snippets of the person that you are. I know you stand fiercely by people that you care about, and you care about a lot of people. And again, that's a nice thing to see, and a lot of people don't get to see that.
Well, I appreciate it. That's what life's about, and letting people make mistakes, including me. So you've got to show some tolerance on that. But yeah.
And you talk about leaving college presidency on a high note. Again, you were not warmly welcomed by some constituencies when you became a college president. You're not an academic. It's become more common to have non-academics be leaders of colleges and universities. But at the time, at University of North Florida, that was not the model. And by the time you left, they were naming buildings after you. And I know you don't thirst for any of that kind of stuff. Probably makes you uncomfortable. But and here you are again in a college presidency, and a beautiful college. We're here at Flagler College with such an amazing history. Just amazing that you're able to continue to do good works and bring people together where there's so much divisiveness.
Well, yeah, you mentioned the naming. Construction signs often, it's a new road. They'll have the mayor and all the city council up there. And I wouldn't let anybody do that, and had a couple moves to name some things after me at City Hall. And I said no. So the board actually, as I was heading out at UNF, named the student union there after me, which I have to admit, when I drive by and see the name on there, it makes me very, very proud, even though I would have vetoed it if I'd had the authority to do it. And it's a great world. It's a good world out there.
Well, you certainly make it better. You do. And, you've made our city better. It's, Jacksonville's kind of a big, small city, or a small, big city. There's a handful of really, really famous people in Jacksonville. I think if you ask people to say the names of famous people at this point, there'd probably be a couple football players in there. Yeah. You probably have Bob Hayes. You'd certainly have Artis Gilmore.
Leonard Skinner. Yeah.
That's probably right, but that's a band.
Yeah.
But yes, but certainly you and Nat Glover, who we had the privilege to interview as well, would be right up there, and deservedly so.
Well, appreciate that. You mentioned the non-traditional president route in higher ed. It's historically been, somebody gets a PhD and they teach, and then they become a department chair, a dean, provost, and then they would move on up. And at one point, it's about 5%. I think it's more now, would be non-traditional, where a business person or a military person would be selected. Eisenhower was president of Columbia after World War II, and he called it one of his most miserable experiences in his life. It is a different culture, and it's a culture known as shared governance, where primarily the faculty all have a voice in major decisions that go on, and you have systems to get that feedback. And now the trend has moved way another way in Florida, where elected officials or former elected officials are moving into those spots. The now chair of the Flagler College board views it as a good thing. He thinks that these are people that have to listen to both sides, have had to make decisions, know how to raise money, can tap Tallahassee for money for their institutions, understand campaigning, public speaking, and these kinds of things. Pendulum can always go too far. But in Florida, frankly, setting aside anybody that's in these jobs right now, the non-traditional presidents have actually fared better than the traditional in terms of successful tenures and not getting run out on, ahead of the pitchforks. So
and to do it, you did at the highest level at a state school and now at a private school, and sort of circling back to where we began. I think it works real well personally to have someone like you or Tim Cost over at JU. So long as you both do, you surround yourself with good, strong people that understand the academics and the things that isn't. Now you've been doing it for a while, but that's not your background.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when I interviewed, I said there's probably 6 things if I were on the board I'd look for. You'd like a proven history of leadership, being able to get something done. You'd like a proven history of management, the technical ways to get it done. Dreaming it up in leadership and vision is one thing. Doing it is the second. Understanding finances, ability to raise money, understanding Tallahassee, understanding the community, and then the sixth is academics.
Sure.
And by and large, the faculty deal with that. And
Provost or whoever.
The provost, exactly. The vice president of academics is who sort of oversees that. And if you've got somebody good in there, then deal with the other 5 elements.
Yeah. Well, John, I know I've taken more of your time than I said I would. Thanks for all you've done for the city. Thanks for what you've done for me personally. And thanks for the great example that you leave. I hope that this discussion is just something that people that are coming up now in particular will listen to and just remember a simpler time, but also qualities that are still valuable and valued. And I look forward to seeing all the great things you continue to do here.
Well, I appreciate it. You've got a gift at the one more gift that I was not aware that you had, but we ought to get you on CNN to replace Larry King or something.
There we go. I'll take it. Make that happen, would you?
Yeah.
Thanks John.
Again.
Appreciate you. Well, there you have it. President John Delaney, former Mayor John Delaney, and just a good guy, a really good thinker, a positive person who sees the best in things and tries to make the best in things. And that's something I certainly would like to do more of. I really enjoyed that conversation. I enjoy all these conversations. And, I went recently, I stayed in Oregon. I went to see my daughter graduate from Oregon State University in Corvallis, and not a lot of hotels there, especially during graduation time. And I stayed in a tiny house, and I am a relatively small person. And I really enjoyed the simplicity of it. And it was just a few days in a little place in Corvallis, kind of adjacent to a bed and breakfast run by a sweet family named the Connors. And I enjoyed that simplicity. I enjoyed just taking a few things. I enjoyed remembering that I only needed a few things. And I don't know, I'm just in a stage of my life where I really enjoy that. And this conversation with John reminded me that, it's really, I don't try to do a lot of these podcasts. I do them when I feel like I have somebody who deserves to be, if that's the right word, memorialized, recognized, held up, or just to see their humanity for people who agree with them, people that don't, or just the way they approach things so that we can all learn from it. And I'm blessed to know a lot of those people or to know people who do. And that's where we get interviews for this podcast, is just through 6 degrees of me. And so if you know people that you think we should be talking to, I hope you'll let me know. But as I get, a little bit older, I'm not trying to accumulate more people and more things. I'm just really trying to synthesize and simplify my life and my relationships, and capturing those moments with someone like John Delaney, who I've admired for so many years and had the opportunity to build somewhat of a friendship with. I don't know, it's a tiny house experience for me. It was just remembering the important things, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I hope you enjoy the podcast. I hope you're a subscriber. If you're not, I hope you'll click that button and subscribe, and you'll be the first to know whenever we have new episodes out. Please do reach out to me if you have ideas as to who we should be interviewing or talking to. And pass this episode on, pass on other episodes that you enjoy. If you enjoyed this one, I think you'll probably enjoy the episode with Tim Cost, president of Jacksonville University, and Zachary Faison, the president of Edward Waters University. We've had other political figures on, including former Sheriff Nat Glover, who we talked about in this episode. So you may want to go back and listen to that one. I hope you'll share this episode with other people. And I do hope you'll come back and join us next time on My First Rodeo. My